Welcome to the fourth episode of the University School True Crime Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Jordan Heiser, with my co-host,
Joe Valerio,
Tristan Jackson,
Christopher Jackson,
and Cam Beiswinger. And we'll be covering the JonBenét Ramsey case. So, JonBenét Ramsey was obviously named JonBenét Ramsey, and she was named after her father, whose name was JonBenét Ramsey. She was born on August 6, 1990 in Atlanta, Georgia, and she died December 26, 1996 in Boulder, Colorado. So JonBenét's dad, his name was John Bennett, and her mom was Patsy Ramsey. And she had two brothers and two sisters. Burke and John Andrew Ramsey were her brothers, and Elizabeth and Melinda Ramsey were her sisters. And one of them passed away when she was young. So her dad worked for a company called Access Graphics, and he was very high up in the business, so he was very rich. And they lived in a 15-bedroom mansion in Boulder, which is a nice area in itself. And this case was timed right after the O.J. Simpson trial, and this caused people to be very involved in true crime and following these types of stories, but this case is still unsolved despite this interest. So, Christmas Day, 1996, the Ramsey family went to another family's house for Christmas dinner, and according to them, JonBenét fell asleep in the car on the way home, and they say they just brought her out of the car up to bed while she was still asleep, which is pretty normal if you've ever done that, if you've ever had a sibling that's done that. So on December 26, 1996 at 5:52 a.m., police dispatch received a forensic call from Patsy Ramsey. And Kimberly Archuleta was the dispatch officer who received this call from Patsy. So early evidence in this case, when dispatch received this call, Patsy had said that there was a ransom note that claimed that their daughter had been kidnapped, and it was found on the back stairway. This note had ended with, quote, SBTC victory, end quote. And basically with police work in this case, they thought it was just kidnapping, and the Ramseys called their close friends to say that JonBenét was missing. They told all their friends to come to their house immediately, which was odd because it could have been a crime scene, but they didn't realize that. They did not secure the scene at all, which was another bad point. And later that day, police officers suggested that John and one of his friends go search through the house because of the sheer size of the house. So the wine cellar. During their investigation, John and his friend went down to the wine cellar, and that's where they found JonBenét's body. So she was wrapped in a blanket on the floor, dead. John claims that he was completely beside himself, and he was screaming and so upset that he picked up his daughter's body in the blanket and brought her upstairs, which was a huge mistake because now the crime scene was tampered with and now it's contaminated. And after he brought her upstairs, the police pronounced her dead, and Patsy was in complete hysterics on the ground, just freaking out. So, just like in many previous cases, police work was not good, and that's one reason why this is unsolved. It's just surprising to me how many cases have so much bad police work. Just how many cases could be solved if there was just one or two more measures taken. So, the complete evidence of this case, there were no signs of forced entry into the house, which was odd if it were to be a kidnapping or break-in or something. There were no footprints in the snow or in the house, although there were pathways, so if somebody did come into the house, they may have avoided all of the snow.
Wow.
And there was a broken window in the basement, but John said that he already knew the window had been broken months before. And I've seen a picture of the window, and it doesn't look like somebody could actually fully fit through that unless you're a very, very small person. Because it was... Like, if you ever see a window in, like, your basement or something...
It's small.
It's not a big window. And this one was...
Its width is normally longer than its height.
Yeah, this window wasn't, like... It wasn't a normal basement window, so it wasn't super small, but, like, it also wasn't a normal window that you would see in like a house. It wasn't this big thing that somebody could fully walk through.
Right.
It was like you would have to squeeze yourself to get through that while not cutting yourself on the broken glass.
That's true.
Is there a number on how many entrances there were?
I would assume many, considering it was a 15-bedroom mansion.
Understandable.
I would say there were probably a decent amount of entrances, but at the same time, I would think you would know if somebody went through one of them,
Right.
considering most of the time you would keep your doors locked, especially even if you're in a nice neighborhood.
Yeah, and then going back to the point where the father carried her up the stairs messing with, like, fingerprints, so that could be false and it could be his,
Yeah.
and then it's not him who killed his
It
daughter.
contaminates the crime scene.
It's also bad too because even if it is a broken case, if the body was securely wrapped in something, there's still the bag, and then thumbprints, fingerprints, hair strands, saliva, all that stuff could be used as evidence. But
Yeah.
the fact that he touched it,
Yeah, the fact that he touched it
It
totally,
contaminates all
it
of
totally ruins it. 'Cause
And
now,
it could be a cover-up for something.
right?
And so he thought that they were in a safe neighborhood, so he never got the window repaired, like I was saying. And they also ended up finding a heavy-duty black flashlight in their house that nobody ever claimed it belonged to them. So that was weird, but the ransom note, as I mentioned earlier, was a big part of this case. And it's led people to many conspiracy theories and things like that, which... So this ransom note was 3 pages long, which is abnormally long for a ransom note. You would think it's maybe a page at most.
that's ridiculous.
And it was written on a notepad that was from the Ramsey kitchen. And the note said, to get their daughter back, they would need to get them, or these supposed kidnappers, $118,000, which was exactly John's Christmas bonus for the year from his work. And it was strange that they knew the exact amount, or that that's the amount that they put into the note. And they thought that it was maybe somebody from his work that would know that, but they were very rich, so why would somebody ask them for only $118,000 in a ransom note? When experts looked over the ransom note, they thought it was a sign of some type of staging, and the handwriting in the beginning slightly changed throughout, which would suggest that somebody tried to make it look very different in the beginning, and then it changed throughout the whole note, whether that be back to their normal writing or they changed it to a different writing later on. And there were lines in the note that were basically the same lines as movies with ransom notes. And investigators took handwriting samples from John and Patsy from the same notepad this was written on. They were able to rule out John from writing the letter completely, but they were not able to prove whether Patsy did or did not write it. Some experts have said that the handwriting was similar to some of the things that Patsy wrote, specifically things such as the letter Q. And possession and business were both spelled wrong. And as stated earlier, the note was signed SBTC, and nobody knows what that means or stands for. But once we get to the end of this, you'll see that I have different meanings that it could mean, and that leads to different theories and things like that. But like I said earlier, her body was found in the basement wrapped up in a blanket, and the cause of death was ultimately ruled strangulation, and she was killed with stuff from Patsy's painting supplies. She was also hit in the head with some type of very heavy object, which is still unknown, but it very well could have been that flashlight that they found that nobody claimed. And she had some marks and some signs of sexual abuse, and evidence shows that the strangulation had happened 45 minutes to 2 hours after she was hit in the head. She also had duct tape over her mouth, and they later found that there were fibers from Patsy's sweater on that duct tape. And Patsy was wearing the same outfit that she wore to dinner the next day. And when she was buried, her parents put December 25th as the day that she died, when they had absolutely no clue whether it was 25th or 26th. And like I said earlier, the phone call came in on the 26th at 5:52 a.m. how would you know what day she had died? Like even with forensic investigation, it would still be so hard to tell if it was on the 25th or 26th, because you would have to go so in depth that it would take current technology to figure that kind of stuff out. Just because you'd have to go into like how long has the body been sitting there, or how long has decomposition been, like stuff like that. They didn't really have that type of stuff then. But very quickly after she was found, the Ramseys stopped cooperating with the police, and they did a TV interview without telling their lawyer or the police of any of this. And there was DNA evidence, which is very important, and this evidence was of an unidentified person underneath her fingernails, which could have been defensive evidence. And there was also that same DNA found in her underwear, but it was nobody from the Ramsey family. So the Ramseys and the police both had a timeline, but they were somewhat different timelines. So the Ramsey family says that somebody broke into their house in the middle of the night, and the biggest thing at play here was that JonBenét was a huge pageant girl. She did all kinds of pageants, and her mom was a pageant queen. And due to this, many people thought it was some sort of pedophile from a pageant that had snuck into their house. But they were not able to find any connection to the pageant world at all, so the parents became the prime suspects. And the only problem is that JonBenét was killed 45 minutes to 2 hours after she was knocked out, so they couldn't have like an exact timeline to say when this all happened. But a huge part of this case is her brother, Burke Ramsey. He was a huge missing link in all of this, and he was 9 at the time that this happened, and he was apparently sleeping in his bed the whole time and was sleeping up until the police came, even though Patsy went into his room freaking out and screaming. And Burke was on Dr. Phil talking about this back in 2016, which was 20 years after this case had happened. He stated that he slightly awoke when Patsy came into his room, but fully awoke when the police arrived and shined a flashlight into his room. Dr. Phil then claimed that people said Burke did not freak out and was not curious because he had already known what happened, and he knew people would accuse him. So people found it odd that he would just stay in bed when people are freaking out in his house, running around screaming, making frantic phone calls. And Kimberly Archuleta, the person who answered the call from Patsy, said that she heard other voices in the background of said police call. Because at the end of the call, Patsy thought she had hung up, but she didn't. And you can hear muffled voices. And due to technology now, people have gone through the call and say they may have heard a third voice in said call. So again, it's just, there's so many different conspiracies with this case. Thinking that a 9-year-old could possibly do something like this is just, it's just unreal to me to think that. But I mean,
that's the one thing that's like keeping him from being a suspect, but
at the same time, like his sister was so successful in the pageant world and got all of the attention from like their parents and all this type of stuff. You could see some sort of like a motive. Again, not saying it was him, not saying it wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, but at the same time, you do gotta. This is a 9-year-old kid. Like I don't know. Maybe he was different, but at least whenever I was a 9-year-old, I wasn't thinking about murdering people. So
yeah.
Maybe
I don't know about you, Chris, or Tristan,
or Cam.
Jordan, Cam. I don't know about you guys, but
didn't they also say there was a chance of her being sexually assaulted as well?
Yeah.
Due
to well, they said that solely based on the fact that there were some defensive, not necessarily marks. There were a few marks, but there was like unidentified DNA under her fingernails, and that was the same DNA that was in her underwear.
Right.
So that would lead people to believe that there was sexual assault.
Well, I don't know if a 9-year-old would have anything to do with the sexual part, but the murdering part, yeah. I mean, if he was, didn't get the attention he wanted, as it seems, since she was so successful, maybe he was like super salty that he was like, I want more attention so I could get rid of her and get it.
I feel like even though like just by the sheer chance that there was sexual assault though, it just like rules it out entirely due to the fact that like most 9-year-olds don't even know what it is per se.
Yeah.
So like for it to be a possible chance of having been done, I feel like it just doesn't make sense for it to be him.
Yeah. And so another big part of this case was that there was a bowl of pineapple and milk sitting on the dining room table, which was supposedly JonBenét's favorite dessert. And
Pineapple and milk?
That's a weird combination.
I could not tell you.
As a dessert?
I could not tell you at all.
That's a weird one. Okay.
And there were fingerprints on the bowl, but they were from Patsy and Burke, which was supposedly from the night before. And there was also a glass of tea on this table. But when they did JonBenét's autopsy, there were still remnants of pineapple in her stomach, which is strange since the Ramseys claimed she fell asleep in the car and they took her right to bed and she stayed asleep the whole time until she was found dead the next morning. And this pineapple would have been all digested if she had eaten it earlier or days before this had happened. So, again, just really putting the Ramseys in a bad spot.
Yeah.
Their story being that, JonBenét wasn't awake at all from the time that they started driving back to their house, and then she was found dead the next morning. Whereas police and medical officials are now saying that, she would have had to have eaten this pineapple within the time frame of them getting home and her being found dead.
So now this could maybe go back to earlier with the dad picking up her body.
Him
and
trying
then,
to possibly cover something up.
Sabotaging.
So, in 2008, Patsy died due to ovarian cancer. So all that was left in this case is John and Burke. So Burke did not do many interviews at all, but he did one with Dr. Phil, and he was acting very, very odd if you've ever seen this interview. I've seen multiple psychological analysts and just like analysis of how he was acting, and people have said that he seems guilty by some of the things he said or the way that he said them or things like that. But if you haven't seen it, he has this kind of awkward smile on his face the whole time when talking about his dead sister, which they've said could have been, stress or things like that, because, you're talking about your sister when you were 9 years old, she got killed.
Yeah.
So mixed emotion.
Yeah. And he said that he went to her funeral and remembered odd details about when he viewed her body, such as, one of her eyes was drooping a little bit. Now, he did go through media scrutiny and judgment since it happened, and he may have some anxiety issues and other things to explain his actions during these interviews. And like I just said before, he was smiling a lot and he seemed very nervous during these interviews. So there were a few suspects, but there was also a theory by the Ramseys, and there was a theory, I don't know if it was by the Ramseys, but the Ramseys were also a suspect, as you could assume.
Mm-hmm.
But due to the fact this happened in their home, the Ramseys were instantly suspects. And many people, and here's the theory, many people have claimed that Burke was a somewhat violent kid. And apparently he had hit JonBenét with things in the past, so it may be possible that Burke somehow hurt her by accident and either killed her or thought he killed her. and the parents did not want to lose both kids, so they staged the entire thing.
I think that, like, if you have more than one, anyone who has more than one kid will tell you that, you know, they're gonna fight, they're gonna hit each other.
Mm-hmm.
That's just how kids are. So I don't really know if that. It depends on like.
What violence?
Yeah, like
Yeah, it
like,
depends on
what did he hit her with?
Depends on what he had hit her with in the past.
Right. Yeah.
And then how violent of a kid was
Right.
she? Like,
And like, was this like an everyday thing, or was it like
Exactly.
every?
And
once
kind
in
of
a while?
going on the bowl of pineapple from earlier, experts think that JonBenét may have woken up in the middle of the night and she was excited about Christmas and everything that was going on. And so she went downstairs and Patsy and Burke were having this bowl of pineapple and milk. And the theory goes that she may have taken some pineapple out of the bowl, and that's why none of her DNA would be on the bowl or the table at all. And it was possible that, you know, he was mad that she took some of this pineapple, grabbed a flashlight, which was found later on. Ramsey said they didn't own it, and hit her in the head with it.
That's a good theory, I guess, because, like, any young child during, like, Christmas time, or definitely on Christmas Eve,
Is excited, will run down the stairs
to try to see if Santa
You know,
came.
if you see your mom and your brother down there having your supposed favorite
You're gonna
dessert,
chime
you
in
would
as
have
well,
some.
yeah.
And the thing that kind of puts this theory into place is that Patsy was wearing the same outfit, so it was possible that she staged the whole thing just to protect Burke. And like I said before, some of the fibers from her sweater were on the duct tape that was on JonBenét's mouth.
Okay.
That's interesting.
So the suspects started with a man named Michael, who confessed to the killing of JonBenét to a coworker, and then he committed suicide 2 months after her death. But it was never proved that he did it. And so the next suspect is John Mark Carr. John is a father and a teacher, and in 2008, John Mark Carr came forward and said that he did it. But that was crazy because he made up the entire thing. He was just obsessed with JonBenét. He came forward by emailing a journalism professor named Michael Tracy. Tracy had emailed back and forth with Carr for 4 years in order to gain his trust. Tracy said this, quote, "You are reading and hearing a truly dark side of the human psyche, and having to pretend it is okay, that I wasn't going to sit in judgment, because otherwise the communication would have stopped. This is the worst experience of my life by far. It was horrible," end quote. In his emails, Carr used similar wording to the ransom note, and at what point he used Patsy's mother's nickname, Nettie. And it was bizarre that he would even know that. And Carr would eventually write that he was in love with JonBenét and would later confess to hitting JonBenét in the head with a flashlight. And here is some of the email that he sent to the journalism professor. Quote, she of course was asleep from the time that I took her from her bed and took her into the basement. Her first reaction was, "Where am I?" And I said, "You are in your basement." She wasn't in that little room to be disgraced, and I would never disgrace her or dishonor her. She was there temporarily, and what really hurts me is that she stayed there, and that's where her father found her. And it's just a horrible thing, end quote. So, on August 16th, 2008, with the help of British intelligence, the Royal Thai authorities, and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, they were able to track down Carr in Bangkok, Thailand, where he had traveled from the U.S. to escape child pornography charges in California. A few months after this confession, Boulder County District Attorney Mary Lacey issued a formal apology to John Ramsey for the suspicion of his family that he had lived with, and said that no one in the Ramsey family is considered a suspect. Carr's DNA, however, did not match the DNA found at the scene, and he was not charged with the murder. However, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security continued to investigate John Mark Carr. He had always maintained that he had not acted alone. There were 2 unidentified sets of footprints found at the scene, supposedly, even though earlier it was claimed there were no footsteps, so I don't necessarily know how credible that is.
I feel like I just want to say this. I feel like if you have the ability to find out whether the DNA doesn't match, you definitely have the idea or have the ability to find out who it does match.
Yeah.
If you can find out who it doesn't match, you can figure out who it does.
Well, you also have to take into account this happened in '96.
Yeah, that's true.
When DNA, like the database wasn't huge.
As good as it is now.
Like now you
keep
have
track of
you have
cameras. Everything.
you have
Yeah.
you're probably near half the population within some sort of database.
Yeah.
Also, like, say you put 100 people in a room and one of them's a suspect. Still a 100-to-1 ratio. It's easier to get the wrong answer than it is the right.
Right, and then like back then they didn't have like technology wise like cameras for houses like Ring, like that comes in big now, so like you can find out.
You've seen so
who
many
it is.
cases solved by Ring
Right.
cameras.
So like, back then you definitely had that so that's big, find out who it is because it shows the camera. So.
And so, former Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner, the lead investigator on the JonBenét Ramsey case for a time, said in a Reddit AMA that, quote, his confession, once they shared it with us, did not match the evidence at the scene. We knew within 18 hours that he was not the guy. We were able to confirm he was not even in Colorado at the time by just doing some routine checking and then obtained photos of him in Georgia at that time, end quote. Again, another guy that was just obsessed with her, and you've seen this with many cases where they say they did it just to get the popularity for it. Yeah. So the next suspect, his name is Bill McReynolds. Bill came to the Ramsey house 2 days prior to JonBenét's murder dressed as Santa. His own daughter was kidnapped 22 years before in 1974, and his wife wrote a play about a child getting molested and then murdered in a basement. According to the Denver Post, this man felt close to JonBenét. He said, quote, her murder was harder on me than my operation. She made a profound change in me, end quote. He even brought a vial of glitter given to him by JonBenét into heart surgery. He even asked his wife to mix the glitter with his ashes if he were to die. However, there is nothing to suggest that he is the murderer. Just like the last guy. Another just weird guy that was just obsessed with JonBenét.
That's weird.
What a
Like,
play and everything. That's weird.
like, why was it such a specific play, too?
Right.
And why did it match the case so well? And then they said he wasn't a suspect, or he wasn't. Nothing suggested that he was the murderer.
I think we solved it.
We got
like that just isn't
we got another
coincidence.
suspect though. That's the thing.
That's just
And
weird.
this guy is pretty high on my list of he could have done it. So Gary Oliva. Gary is a man who lived a few blocks away from the Ramsey home at the time of the murder. In 2016, Oliva was arrested on charges of child pornography, and in December of 2000, he was arrested on unrelated drug charges. He was found to be carrying a photo of JonBenét in his backpack. He explained why he had the photo to the Denver Post. He said, quote, JonBenét's murder touched me very deeply. I felt she was an exceptional girl whose death was an exceptional loss. I felt the need to build a monument, a shrine to remember this little girl, end quote. A high school friend named Michael Vale revealed in an interview that Oliva called him a day after the murder occurred and said, quote, I hurt a little girl, end quote. And according to Vale, Oliva also revealed the location of where he hurt this little girl, Boulder, Colorado. After which, Oliva hung up the phone. This is interesting because no other girl was harmed in that area that night. And Vale also revealed that the strangulation method used on JonBenét was also allegedly used by Oliva when he attempted to strangle his own mother with a telephone cord. And Gary was also not a match to the DNA evidence, which, you know, I will say, kind of like the O.J. Simpson case, obviously that's completely different. So much more evidence towards him, especially DNA. But DNA at this time wasn't 100% reliable. Like it's still not 100% reliable. It's a lot more reliable than it was then. But it was so flawed in many aspects that all these people, they said it couldn't have been their DNA, like Oliva and McReynolds and those guys. You know, it might have been them. And the DNA sequencing and stuff like that might have just been off when they tested it.
I want to take back what I said earlier about I think we solved it. This guy.
Yeah.
This guy
Yeah.
right here. This one. That's the guy.
That's very weird that you have a picture of a little girl in your wallet.
A backpack.
Backpack, sorry.
I mean, it would have been weirder if it was his wallet,
Yeah,
but I see where you're going
you
with
know,
that.
still weird. Weird enough.
And so at the trial, a grand jury looked at the case and suggested that the Ramseys go to trial, even though they had been cleared by police, which, again, just kind of supports the fact that they could have done it or covered something up or, you know, whatever. And the district attorney's office dismissed this trial because they were cleared by DNA evidence, like I literally just said, might not have been 100% reliable. So, Dr. Henry Lee. Dr. Lee is a DNA expert and was on a CBS exclusive about the case. He is best known from the O.J. Simpson case. He studied the DNA from the JonBenét scene, and he found that JonBenét's underwear may have held transferred DNA from the manufacture process, and proved this by testing an unopened bag of underwear, which also had foreign DNA on it. So the fingernails and underwear DNA might not have matched, and they thought it did, like I just said. It could have been flawed. And so the CBS program concluded that the DNA from the scene was therefore fallacious, meaning that conceivably any of the suspects could have been the killer. So like we were just saying,
Yeah.
It's hard to set it on one person, but
Definitely.
you know.
I would really want to say what Joey said. This guy for sure.
Oh,
But I
Eva?
mean, but then keep on going back to earlier. Her dad. I mean, and her brother. I mean,
They're all just suspects.
Yeah, I
at
mean, it
this
seems
point.
like that plays a big role because I mean, like,
You know, at this point, it comes down to I don't know. I don't even know if I have a firm answer.
yeah,
I've got a couple people on this list who I think it could have been, but I personally don't have a firm answer. This is the first case so far of recording that I have not had a firm answer on who I think it is.
yeah.
But kind of getting to a different topic related to the ransom note, how it assigned SBTC. So there's a theory that I found. So on your phone keypad, if you look at it, the numbers correspond with 3 or 4 letters, each number. And so if you look for the letters SBTC, the numbers are 7282. Also at 7282 is PATC. If you say that, Patsy. So, and
I don't
the thing, and to right at the end of the letter, don't underestimate us, John. Use that good Southern common sense of yours. It is up to you now, John. Victory, Patsy.
Huh.
Well, let me read this.
But I mean, like, but there's other meanings to it, which could be saved by the cross, so be the case,
I feel like
so be the child, shall be the conqueror, or where John was at one point was the Subic Bay Training Center.
Well, saved
feel-
by the cross. I mean, for the suspects per se, right? Like,
I feel like the Patsy thing corresponding with it. I feel like that might just be a coincidence.
That could just be a stretch.
yeah. 'Cause that's deep. Like, where do you get that from?
I mean, just because I don't have a firm answer, I'm just kind of gonna ask each one of you who you think it is. Joey, who do you think it is?
Gary,
You think it's Gary?
100%.
And remember that Burke and the Ramseys are all on this list too.
I believe that, I don't believe it was Bert, but I believe it could have been, it could have been a cover up.
Yeah.
With not necessarily more John than Patrick.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to lean towards Gary, but like earlier, I mean, like the sense of her brother and the dad, I want to lean towards like them. So I think I'll go with the dad.
I mean, there are a lot of suspects, but I gotta say Bill. Just like the whole play about someone being murdered
Yeah.
and molested in a basement, like I just feel like it's too specific.
You know, I thought it was Burke since I've seen this case, but as I went into looking at the analysis of like his actions and stuff during interviews, I've more shifted to thinking it was probably Gary, just because he lived so close and he made that call right after it happened. Like, how would he have known?
That's true.
And I mean, I think it's Gary. Joey thinks it's Gary. I think it can go. It's a toss-up, really, but I think based off what I guess quote unquote majority of us right now think it's Gary.
Yeah, I'll go with that.
I can agree with that.
And this is the end of the 4th episode of the University School True Crime Podcast.